verses 1 through 20. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was served him, I carried the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before. So the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This can only be sadness of heart." Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad when the city, the place of my ancestors' graves, lies waste, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" Then the king said to me, "What do you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven. Then I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor with you, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my ancestors' graves, so that I may rebuild it." The king said to me, and the queen also was sitting beside him, "How long will you be gone, and when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a date. Then I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let letters be given to me, to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may grant me passage until I arrive in Judah, and a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, directing him to give me timber to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy." And the king granted me what I asked, for the gracious hand of my God was upon me. Then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent officers of the army and cavalry with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. So I came to Jerusalem and was there for 3 days. Then I got up during the night, I and a few men with me. I told no one what God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. The only animal I took was the animal I rode. I went out by night by the valley gate, past the Dragon Spring, and to the Dung Gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that had been broken down, and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on to the Fountain Gate and to the King's Pool, but there was no place for the animal I was riding to continue. So I went up by the way of the valley by night and inspected the wall. Then I turned back and entered by the valley gate, so returned. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest that were to do the work. Then I said to them, "You see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we may no longer suffer disgrace." I told them that the hand of my God had been gracious upon me, and also the words that the king had spoken to me. Then they said, "Let us start building." So they committed themselves to the common good. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard it, they mocked and ridiculed us, saying, "What is this that you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king?" Then I replied to them, "The God of heaven is the one who will give us success, and we, his servants, are going to start building. But you have no share or claim or historic right in Jerusalem." The word of the Lord. My wife and I purchased our first home. It was a historic home in Georgetown, Texas in November of 2007. As we were going through the process to buy this house and I asked my agent what he thought about it, he said, "Well, it's been here for 100 years. It'll probably be around for a few more." That should have been red flag number one, that maybe we shouldn't make this purchase. We moved out of the house in January of 2011 because it was ready to fall down at any moment. I don't know if you've ever lived in these kinds of conditions, but if you have, you know that there's this feeling of exposure, this feeling of abandonment. There's this feeling of hopelessness about the future. Don't talk to me about the future. All I can think about is this devastation that I'm living in literally right now. That's our situation. I think maybe that gives us an idea of what the inhabitants of Jerusalem must have been feeling in our text. We've jumped into this 3-part story 2/3 of the way through. The temple's been rebuilt. A group has returned to be the worshiping community there. They previously attempted to begin rebuilding the walls of the city, but Ezra 4 records King Artaxerxes' decree that you will not rebuild the walls of that city. You will cease and desist. They tried previously to rebuild, and he said no. In chapter 1 of Nehemiah, Hanani arrives from Judah, and Nehemiah asks, hey, how are things in Jerusalem? Tell me about Jerusalem. And he tells them that those who escaped captivity, the lucky ones, that they are covered in shame and trouble. Every part of their life has ridicule and hardship for a companion. The city, its walls destroyed, its gates burned. Literally, it means eaten with fire. No walls, no gates. This means every part of its life, its religious, its economic, its social life, destroyed. It has no future. The temple has no future. The people have no future. Nehemiah sat down, wept, mourned, fasted for days, pouring out his heart and soul to God. Nehemiah's name means the Lord has comforted, but Nehemiah is not comforted. And then we come to chapter 2. Nehemiah tells us he's at this party. It's about 4 months later. Can you imagine trying to go to a party in Nehemiah's shape? He doesn't have a choice, though. It's his job to hand wine to the king in a very particular way. This isn't, hey, will you pass the fried okra? This is like part security advisor meets ballet dancer. He's got to hand this wine just right to the king. It's pragmatic logistics and aesthetic art all wrapped up in one. And as he's handing the wine to the king says, Nehemiah, why are you sad at my party? You must have a broken heart. The king is not showing empathy here. He is literally saying, why is your face bad? Your heart must be bad as well. And begin to understand why Nehemiah says, I was greatly afraid at this. And he says, sir, who could possibly not have a ruined heart right now when the place where my ancestors are buried is ruined? It has no possible way to be preserved. What choice do I have but a broken heart in this situation? He doesn't begin with a plan of action. He doesn't begin with what he wants to do. He begins with a broken heart. You hear that? It kind of sounds like a savior who's weeping while two sisters are asking about their dead brother in a tomb. Maybe that's not a bad starting place for us as we minister to our cities, to feel the pain, to hear the cries, to let that heart of stone become a heart of flesh. I was listening to the news on the radio one morning this past summer, and they announced that an Amber Alert has been issued for little Simon Wayman, 6 years old. He was last seen in a white T-shirt with black cars, khaki shorts, and no shoes. The suspects are unknown. Police are looking for a black Mazda with a green and white bumper sticker. The child is considered to be in immediate danger. This is brought to you by Thundercloud Sub Sandwiches. The weather in Austin today is going to be 91 degrees. Somehow in my city, tragedy has become so routine that we can talk about it objectively, that we can talk about child abductions and sub sandwiches all in the same breath. But Nehemiah reminds me that as long as we process the pain and suffering of our cities with an objective detachment, our cities don't have walls and they don't have gates. Look where Nehemiah goes next. Verse 5. Then I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor with you, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my ancestors' graves, so that I may rebuild it. If your servant has found favor with you, that's part of his argument. Literally, he's saying, if your servant is good in your eyes. He's saying, appraise me, king. Evaluate me to determine the future of this place and these people. If this isn't an assumption of responsibility, I don't know what is. He's putting his own neck on the line here. Nehemiah is leaving behind privilege, prestige, protection, and he's stepping into this place of vulnerability. Kind of reminds me of something I heard once about a newborn baby being laid in a feeding trough, who, although in his very nature was God, made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant. For 30 years now, Mama Aida and Papa Roland have served the Lord as missionaries. Over these past 3 decades, they've opted to minister in the nasty back alleys and dimly lit side streets of Hong Kong, the financially barren orphanages of Indonesia, the smoldering trash dumps and pits of Mozambique. When they began their ministry, they said, "We want to minister in vulnerability." Today, they fed 10,000 children. Tomorrow, they will feed 10,000 more children. Vulnerability. You see, Nehemiah, Mama Aida, and Papa Roland remind me that as long as we avoid vulnerability and step away from it, our cities don't have walls and they don't have gates. Why Jerusalem? Why Jerusalem? Why does this place matter so much to him? If you've read the story before, have you ever noticed in chapter 1, he asks about two things, the people and the place? These two are linked for him. It's like a body and a soul. These two just go together. And he repeats it again in verse 17. Jerusalem is in trouble, and we suffer disgrace. These two, the place and the people, are linked for him. Place matters to him. He hides it from the king. When he's talking to the king, he says, "Oh, yeah, it's Judah or somewhere beyond the river. I don't really remember. Over there, king." No, it's Jerusalem. It's a very particular place. It's the place of his ancestors' tombs. It's that place that represents the heartbeat of his faith. It's the place of real people, his people. It's his place of remembering. Do you have a place like this? I read an interesting story about a place like that. It remained hidden for 17 years until it was revealed by a nosy photographer in a hot air balloon, of all things. You see, 17 years prior, before it was revealed, Winston Howells marked off 6 acres of his farm. He called his family and his closest friends, said, "Come over," and together they planted 6,000 oak trees. But in the middle of creating this forest on his farm, he left a meadow in the middle, the shape of a heart. The shape of a heart. The occasion for this was the sudden and tragic death of his wife of 33 years. She passed away. And now he follows this secret path to a meadow. He's got a folding old metal chair beneath his arm. Sets this up in the middle of there, and he sits and he thinks and he remembers and he laughs and he cries. What do people and places have to do with each other? Nothing and everything. Absolutely everything. For Nehemiah, Jerusalem is a place of remembering. It's this place of orientation because of what's there, the temple. And the temple's been rebuilt, and that's all good and well, but it's not enough. The place and the people of the worshiping community need a city. You see, Cyrus' edict in Ezra 1 was to build the temple, not the city. This is confusing. It was to build the temple, not the city, but here they are concerned about the city. Nehemiah understands that these two are linked like a body and soul. Nehemiah reminds me that insofar as we think about churches apart from cities, as long as we practice this disembodied spirituality, our cities don't have walls and gates for protection. And there's so much more to say about Nehemiah's preparation, his commitment to God, his trust in God, his boldness, his prophetic confrontation of the status quo. All these things we could talk about. All these things are good, but the core of what he does flows out of this respect for people and place, body and soul, stepping into the pain, stepping into the vulnerability. I've heard this before. Oh, yeah. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Amen.